the water quality gets better. So red is bad, blue is good. And this really shows, this was sediment load that was going into the lake. And there was a policy decision made around 2005 to reduce that load. And so through this kind of visualization, you're really able to now better understand the effectiveness of policies and decision-making and what that means for the environment. Next slide. And then next slide again, please. Here you can see mangrove change over time. Next slide. And some of the work that's being done now that we're testing with is looking at coastline change. One of the issues that we're working on is how to get the tidal model incorporated into the existing infrastructure. So there's different libraries that we're working with in order to make that happen. But this is going to be one of the priority products that we'll be working on over the next couple of months. Next slide. And so over the last year, we've set up an interim steering group. It's made up of the four countries that I previously spoke about. But then we also have Brian, and let me just do a shout out to Brian also. Brian's been very much involved in the Pacific Project from the very beginning. And so all of his contributions and support and analysis is greatly appreciated. GEO is obviously a member of the steering committee as well as Geoscience Australia and the others that you see here. And the seed funding that was provided for this program was coming in from NOAA and DFAT in Australia. So many thanks to them as well. Next slide. And so the approach to Digital Earth Pacific is one where we do want to make it multi-stakeholder, have an inclusive governance structure, a lot of engagement, and really focused on co-design and capacity development, and really think about what we need to do from a user-centered approach. That then translates into a number of principles. This is probably quite similar to the Digital Earth Africa context, where we want to be demand-driven, user-centric, create partnerships. This is a public good. Think about holistic capacity development and interoperability and so forth. Next slide, please. And so we've laid out a program, an 8-year program that's broken into 3 phases, where I guess you could argue we're in the sort of early stages of setting the foundation, although we still need to bring in the sort of big chunk of funding in order to properly launch the program. And so this first phase is really creating the technical infrastructure, some of the initial use cases and engagement with stakeholders. The second stage is around capacity development and uptake, where now that there is an infrastructure in place, how do we really get more products to be used? And then creating an ecosystem approach where we don't want all the dependencies of the development of these products and services to be on the host institution. How do we engage with private sector, with civil society, with other innovators to take the core data that's being made available and really create the sort of last mile and value added products and services? But that's down the road. Next slide, please. And so we're actively fundraising. Like I said, we have gotten the initial seed funding from NOAA and DFAT. We're looking at a number around 20 million over an 8-year time period in order to run this as a program. And again, this is not about creating a platform, as Lisa indicated. This is not about just a technical solution. It's about how to develop a program and have that program properly staffed so that you're building capacity, awareness, uptake, and what that means for decision-making and policy-making across the region. We'll be doing more on the core infrastructure, development of these demonstration data products, further engagement with additional countries, the creation of some initial capacity development tools and resources. And there is an Oceania Geospatial Symposium that's happening in Noumea, New Caledonia, on November 28th to December 4th, where Digital Earth Pacific will be featured. And next slide. And since this is GEO Week, I thought I'd throw in a slide where I think the group on Earth observations could provide better support, not just to Digital Earth Pacific, but essentially to all of the Digital Earth programs. And this is coming from some of the questions that were raised when we co-presented at SAT Summit just a couple of months ago. And so how do we get better collaboration and sharing across the existing Digital Earth programs? I think each one of the programs, and like probably many in the room, we're all struggling for finding the level of funding that's required in order to get these programs launched and also sustained. So how do we better coordinate around funding requirements? How do we create the right partnerships to support capacity development and how these programs can scale? And then always, one of the big questions is, how do we get better access to commercial data at reduced or some type of an agreement where commercial data can be more readily used for some of the issues in these developing countries? I can stop there now, Brian. I do have a 3-minute video, but if I'm over time, we can pass on that.
You're close. Try the video.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's always better if you hear from the people from the region than me. So hopefully this video works and you can hear it. I think you have to click one more time. Is the sound working?
Well, it's captioned.
Oh, no sound though?
Sound. You want to narrate it?
Sure. Brian, feel free to move on. It's probably kind of awkwardly silent in the room.
All right, it's captioned. We'll give it a minute.
Okay.
We've all heard Stuart enough, so this is good.
And then just the last slide whenever we're done.
Okay. All right, there you go. So there you go. The final slide is up.
Yep, no, that's it. Thank you. And there's contact information right there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Aditya. All right, our last speaker is Samantha Juarez from EDI. Over to you.
Thank you. The room is this shape. I prefer to stand, but bear with me. I have my notes here. I have some lists that I won't remember, so I try to have them with me. Okay, so Digital Earth Americas we already heard is way newer, fresher than these two other digital Earth initiatives. So we should start with saying where it's at and what it is. But I think that what is it? This way? Okay. Okay. So what it is, it's a difficult question. I think we recently engaged in some really intense discussions about what Digital Earth Americas is. But I would say that it is an ongoing initiative towards establishing open and sustainable framework with a focus on EO to solve critical problems in the region of the Americas. Can we go to the next slide, please? Well, this diagram simply shows us the whole concept behind it, using satellite images to inform decisions. So in reality, we want to increase the impact that satellite images have already in the region of the Americas to benefit the inhabitants in the region. Next slide, please. And I thought that it would be good to provide some context on the work that we've been doing. So these next 3 slides are taken from previous presentations. So when I say regional context, is a regional context that we provided like 2 years ago. And I'm mentioning here the first workshop of Digital Earth Americas, which was organized by ENEGI, UN ECLAC, and CEOs. In which we learned about the experiences of Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, and Chile's data cube. So in this workshop, we kickstarted the conversation to know about who is using Earth observation data cube in the region, how are they using it, and who wants to use it as well. That was one of the purposes. Next slide, please. And then also afterwards, in September 2020, there was the joint session of UN GEO Americas with GEO. This joint session derived in the Aguascalientes Declaration, and we very clearly saw that there was a very strong interconnection between the Aguascalientes Declaration and the objectives of Digital Earth America. So here I am highlighting the three of these objectives, the 3 that I consider more common between the 2. Improving communication among the countries, relevant international stakeholders and organizations that are involved or that have some interest in it. Increasing the capacity for the acquisition and the use of geospatial information, and establishing relationships and cooperation mechanisms. So those 3 objectives come from something that was signed by a lot of regional entities and matches the vision of Digital Earth Americas. Next slide, please. And we also very early found out that the key to creating and achieving Digital Earth Americas was collaboration, because we had some countries that already had a data cube and some countries that wanted a data cube, very different methodologies, very different uses of it. So in reality, we saw that there was no need to duplicate efforts, and that the region shares some common critical issues. So it just makes sense that having some countries help the other countries, and then each in reverse, we could create a very strong community. And also it should be mentioned that the Americas has a very strong familiar feeling with each other. We always see some Latin friends and friends that we know from the region, and we know that we share something. We have previous work for like example, within the context of GEO and UNGEO in Americas, there have been a lot of regional collaboration projects. So it wouldn't be an icebreaker. The ice is already broken in the region. Next slide, please. After this very first initial workshop and the Aguascalientes Declaration, we found some funding from the Australian government. So CIO Chile, through the Australian government, helped us organize, and I say us, I mean GEO, UN ECLAC, and UNGG Americas, organized a 3-series workshop of Digital Earth Americas, just to share the, well, in a way, share the idea, but growing with a growing level of complexity. You may recognize some of us in the in the workshop that is actually more recent. That was on Amerigeo Week this year. So we also had a side event in Amerigeo Week sharing the idea. But this 3-part series workshop, I don't know if you can look at the titles of each, but the first one was Value and Challenges of Earth Observations. The second one was data cubes, different tools for different needs. So the first one was very introductory level. The second one showed the different options that there are for the implementation of a data cube with a focus of the context of the Americas. And the third one was data cubes, real solutions for real problems. This was my favorite, very interesting. Actually, we have here one of the participants, Rafa from Costa Rica, and one of the technical leaders, Brian from Massachusetts. These deep dive studies that happened between Brian and Jamaica and Costa Rica, the Ministry of Environment, and CIRO consisted in just the dialogue, sharing the need that they wanted to be addressed using Earth observations, and then the technical expert, in this case was Brian with Jamaica, creating a solution. So it was a very interesting thing to see, having the open dialogue of what the countries really needed, and providing the feedback in order to have them really have a say on what is being developed. In the previous one, I think that we were just sharing what everyone was doing for their own purposes, but in this one, there was an actual conversation of what was needed. I think this also helped us just keep in mind that it's important that the outcome of a platform does not lose the ownership in the process, because then the data can be out there, but the user won't have it because they don't understand what it is or they don't really need it. Next one, please. And more recently, not even a month ago, we had 4 very interesting sessions, work sessions in Mexico City. They were titled altogether Digital Earth Americas, What's Next? Regional collaboration towards using EO for decision-making in the Americas. What's next? Because we already have shared the idea, we have gathered a community of users or potential users that were interested in joining the community, but how? So that's why these sessions were organized. Next one, please. Okay, so in here I'm just sharing the pictures, official pictures of the in-person attendees and some of the people that joined us remotely. It was a hybrid event. I think it was the first time that I had an in-person meeting since COVID. And these were the 4 sessions that we engaged in during this event. Strategic activities towards regional collaboration. It was a session that addressed what people are doing with data cubes. The use of the Mexican Geospatial Data Cube in Mexico, it was a part of the use in the geospatial information production and a part of the use in the research of it, the application of novel techniques, data science, and machine learning. All of that falls into the it's okay, but for official information, it has to have a further validation process. And the session C about ocean information, it was addressing economic accounting and how EU can support the production of this type of information. The fourth session was opportunities in the Caribbean, and I want to focus a little bit more about this because this session showed in a way a more solid progress. So can we go to the next one, please? Okay, so during this session, Beshem, he's here, joined us remotely. He is, I think, the head of geomatics department in the University of West Indies. This university has several, like 4 campuses in the region of the Caribbean. And this is just his cover slide. I hope he doesn't mind that I take it, but he's sharing the perspectives in the Caribbean for the implementation of a geospatial data center. And let me just explain what I mean by that. Recently, July 28, INEGI, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and the University of West Indies signed a memorandum of understanding which describes a collaboration project. So this collaboration project is divided into a set of infrastructure, a capacity building program, and a set of activities aimed at sharing the results and the dissemination of the activities. But it's just started, so he was sharing in this session what the expectations were from the University of West Indies, and also he shared what the proposal was for the capacity development program. And the next slide, please. So the capacity development program, after this discussion was proposed, it's under evaluation already, or still, but it consists of 3 stages. One stage is that addresses the implementation of the infrastructure, buying some servers, getting them installed in the university data center. And then there is the second part, the technical skills. So the technical skills to use this infrastructure, we divided them into 2 modules. The one that is the operationalization of the infrastructure, generating products constantly at the regional or national level, and then another one that we call thematic applications. So it's just a very wide range of workshops where the trainees can learn a little bit of what applications are out there. And for this one, well, he cannot do it all. We have some examples, but we are willing and very eager to have another some other entities, share also their skills, because, well, the first one, the computational infrastructure, it is very focused in the capacities and skills of the university, but once that is achieved, the rest of the technical skills can be very transferable. So in here I have a list of some examples that an email here is available to share during this part of the activities in the MOU of the capacity development program. So I have urban growth, productive infrastructure, natural resources, and statistical information. Up next, I just have some videos showing what these applications show or look like. Can we go to the next one? So this is a video. Can you please click around here? Yes, so this is just an example of geomedian images, a series of geomedian images in my hometown, Aguascalientes, showing the growth of the city. This can be applied in a lot of contexts. You can integrate this information with different data sets and learn from it more than what you are looking at, but just what you're looking at is even good enough information. Can we go to the next one, please? So this application shows us how we can observe the development of productive information, infrastructure, sorry. This is car factory being built in the region of Puebla. So you can see how the territory has changed during this event. You can maybe link this information to different inputs that you have and derive outcomes from that. Can we go to the next one, please? This is one of the favorites. It's a public policy evaluation. And in here you are seeing first color image from 1986, overlapped with the one from 2017. And this first color, we see that there was some change in the region that is to the right of the river. This river is a border of a natural protected area. So we saw that the region that was actually reserve, the river, sorry, can we go to the previous one? The river that, so the border that divided the area that was protected with the area that wasn't, does show a harsh difference between the two zones. So we see that the public policy was indeed effective. Now, can we go to the next one? And in this one, we see something similar, a happy story as well. We see the surface of the Chapala Lake. So in here we are seeing that one of the most important lakes in Mexico is losing its surface, but then it recovers thanks to public policy on a more responsible use of the water. So it's also a happy story. Not all of the stories will be happy, sadly. Can we go to the next one? This is, can we skip this one, please? Just similar. And then another type of application, which from the previous ones, it's different since this one is integrating the data sets with statistical information. So in this case, it will be very specific to the country, but still is a possible application. In here we are seeing, can we click in this video? At the city block level using census data from Mexico 2010 and 2020, vulnerability index that is developed with the UN Habitat's definition of slum severity index. And this one is interesting. I like this application because it's integrating different data sets, but it's also giving us information. The other ones were just something that we had to interpret. But in this case, we see a color code telling us which city blocks are more vulnerable. Very simple, but I think it communicates more and it can reach further to the decision makers. Can we go to the next one, please? Yep, this is okay. So there seems to be a mistake in this slide, but I just want to finish sharing some of the main outcomes from these discussions. In these discussions, we convened that the 3 goals of Digital Earth Americas are to measure, enable, and inspire the Americas. So measure, okay, things are happening and we want to know how are they happening, what's the magnitude of the effects from these events. We want to also enable economic growth and inspire community engagement to further proceed in this initiative. Notice that data or infrastructure or technology are not in the mix. Okay, so Digital Earth Americas is not about one type of data, one type of technology, one type of software. It's more about a community that can share the progress and then close the data gaps, the technology gaps, and every other gap, because it's just users that can understand each other. Can we go to the next slide, please? And that's it for my part. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers. So we have about 20 minutes and I have some canned questions for our panel members, including DT Online, but I would prefer to open the floor to any questions from the audience. because that's probably more important than my questions. So are there any immediate questions? If not, I can cede the conversation. And I think I'll hand you the microphone if you have one so that Aditya can hear it as well. Anything burning? You've seen 3 different digital Earth platforms here of a variety of advancement.
Thank you. Enjoyed all 3 presentations and very different examples. I'm wondering, I was just curious to know if there are examples from any of the 3 presenters on the impact of Earth, impact of climate on health, public health, and if Earth observation data has been instrumental in some of those examples anyway.
There was an economic impact study done by Digital Earth Africa or the World Economic Forum. Was health part of that at all? Do you remember? I don't think it was. Aditya, any thoughts from your side on the health impact of a program like these?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. Right now, at least in the Pacific context, we have not come across that particular type of use case within Digital Earth Pacific itself, but it's certainly a broader issue that SPC looks at. So the intersection of climate change and what that means for health impacts is something that we will be looking at, but we just haven't gotten there yet. And it was not something that was included in the World Economic Forum study.
Good question. And I know there's been a number of applications that have been built through these that do address some health factors. Some of those are, infectious disease spread, or, even things associated with insects and biology and tracking that. And all that can be done. It's just a matter of developing the application and then perhaps using the data from this platform to be the seed for that. Something to consider for the program, especially like Digital Earth Africa, which is in an operational setting. They can start to think about how they can address health. Any other immediate questions? Over here. Costa Rica, welcome.
Thank you for the presentations. Very interesting. I wanted to know, 3 things. First, how do we bring together more countries to these programs? I'm not sure if you are covering all of the countries in Africa, or you wish to include more. And what do we need for Digital Earth America to be operational? And what those countries require to get involved in these programs? Thank you.
So questions. Maybe that was all buried in that.
See, you can.
I have a response. Do you want to say something? Yes. Well, I'll start. We've had this conversation quite a bit within North America. How do we bring in countries, engage them in this initial phase, and figure out how to do this? And it becomes complicated pretty quickly, right? Because you have to figure out. You'd like to get a mix of countries in there with various different technical capabilities, and yet you'd like to inspire the rest of the region to eventually take advantage of that and to grow off of that. And that's the hard thing, because if you just open it up initially and say, okay, who's interested? You might get 20 people, 20 countries raising their hands. That's pretty hard to do a prototype. It's pretty hard to start something initial. Digital Earth Africa started with 4 countries. And what we did was we found stakeholders within each of those countries to become engaged in that conversation, to start to work with the data and help us develop what the use cases are. So I think if we can get countries that really want to get engaged, they're going to make a commitment to do so, then I think it can work, definitely. And so there's a lot of interested parties, both stakeholders that are non-country related, like GEO as an example, ECLAC, there's a number of organizations in the region that said, yeah, we're interested in what you're talking about. And then there's individual countries like Costa Rica, and then Brazil has their own data cube, and they've come to us and said, well, how can we get involved? They do it actually very differently, but it's not to say that they couldn't be involved. So I think that's a challenging question, and perhaps as this discussion continues with Digital Earth Americas, we need to bring more people into the discussion and to figure out what is the next step. Jimena mentioned this Caribbean pilot project. I think that's ideal. It's university-led, a couple island countries. Let's learn from that. Can that be expanded, or does that just roll into the Americas? Do you have any other thoughts? We spent days talking about these kind of topics. It's very challenging to figure out how do you start these programs. It's the hardest part, to start the race. And it's, you don't want to start it, at least in my experience, you don't want to start it with 20 different organizations. It just becomes a little complicated, but we've got to do the right thing so that no one feels left out. And then slowly but surely, people and countries and stakeholders get pulled in.
Brian, can I jump in on this?
Yeah, please do. Go right ahead. That's right. You as well.
Yeah, I certainly agree with everything that you're saying. I think engagement, like you can't do enough engagement, but engagement also comes at a cost, financial cost. And so being able to sort of reach out to other countries and be able to really understand what their needs and priorities are, but really come at it from a very demand-driven perspective, such that you are understanding what the specific needs of the country are, and really kind of building the trust and the relationship with those countries such that you can be responsive to that particular need and create a product that's going to be useful is really, I think, kind of the foundation of many of these types of programs. And I think it's also the hardest thing to be able to do. And one way, one sort of tactic to do that is to create a governance structure that's very inclusive of the countries that your program is meant to respond to. Not only in terms of being able to understand what the needs and priorities are and what that means for the prioritized work program that you're going to create for the products and services that will be made available, but then also for the lessons learned and peer-to-peer kind of development that happens across countries. So I think at one level, like Brian was saying, thinking about how to start from kind of a prototype phase where you bring a few countries together to start building the program, engagement with additional countries to understand needs and priorities, but then creating a governance structure that's going to be inclusive and responsive to demand, I think is really important for these types of programs.
Yeah, another thought that comes to mind, thanks Aditi for that. We were talking in our last meeting with the Americas, we have the Caribbean project, and perhaps its focus, because there's a lot of coastlines in all these island countries, might be coastline change, and maybe that's perhaps a focused product for that region that they can start to learn, how can that help us? In Central America, you have a lot of issues with hurricanes and severe storms and disasters. That might be a separate topical area that could be a focus, and maybe developing a regional scale product and talking about how that could enable more things in your region, maybe South America, something slightly different. So there are opportunities to kind of split it up a bit and figure out how we could bring these pieces together. And there's always the possibility it doesn't become Digital Earth Americas in total as one thing. It might end up being in pieces in the end. Could there be a Digital Earth Island and one for Central America and one for South America? It depends how they want to organize. Lisa. Good.
Thanks. So yeah, from our perspective, you were asking the countries to be covered. Yes, we obviously through the data, we cover all 54 countries. But there's a long step between providing the data for all countries to having it used and supported in those countries. And as Brian mentioned, we started off slowly with a handful. The last few years, the emphasis has been on putting together the platform, the data streams, the continental services, because it is a bit of a chicken and egg. You want to have those because you wouldn't have the resources, the capacity to respond to all countries at the same time. So once you have that established, which is where we are now, the next phase is in consolidating that. And that really for us is where that country level engagement comes in. And I just want to link it back to what Aditya said, the government structure is key, being able to engage through different levels. It doesn't all have to be the same. So you need to have an adaptive approach, but also for us, and certainly from my experience working across the continent, is you also need to be able to phrase it or prioritize it within the development context and priorities of that particular country. So while we have our continental services, how they're presented and the demand and the use cases need to be then tailored to the current political priorities in that country. So there are many different factors that come into play. And yes, there's not an easy answer, unfortunately.
Just adding to the question, I think that's the third time that question has come up since I arrived to Ghana, but it's a different, it's a difficult question because I think that the harsh answer is that it depends on the country's context and necessities, because how are you going to define a data cube for a country if you don't know the country? However, I think that that's not the complete answer, because then what you get is a lot of different national data cubes. But what happens if you want them to have a complete regional version of it? I think that you initially have to have a mindset that there is a usefulness in having regional products. So you have to convince the countries that that is something that they want. And also, I think that having Digital Earth Americas achieve can also be just agreeing that sometimes you have to have regional products, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can be happy with what you produce at your national level, and then you can also have collaborative projects that are at the regional level.
And I thank GEO for having this session, because this was our very first opportunity to bring these three initiatives together and to have a discussion like this. And it's good to hear your inputs and your thoughts on how all this can work. So one of the questions I had for the panel was, what opportunities and value do you see in the collaboration of these initiatives? And I assume there's many things that can be gained by us talking and working together more closely. Any thoughts on that?
So I think there are many win-win opportunities amongst the community. And I think those focus probably on around three broad areas: around the technology sharing. I mean, that's an obvious one, around the standards and software in terms of the technology sharing. But then also in terms of the data standards, the algorithm sharing. As Aditya showed, some of the services that we've developed for the continent, they've built on Australian science and innovation. And there's potential then to learn from the learning we had in the African context, then for the Pacific context as well. So certainly around the sharing of those Jupyter notebooks, as well as the services. And then, of course, around the capacity building and the opportunities across the open source community and the data science community more broadly. So I think definitely those, for me, those are three very clear win-win opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian. For me, I think that the key win-win outcome ideal where we all want to be is just having interoperability. I think that we are facing the happy problem of we all want to get there, but we don't know how. So let's just start moving. It's just like Lisa said, egg or chicken problem. Who needs to start in Mexico? We had an initiative to develop a data cube, and then we found users in other countries. It can be the other way around. Some users may want to have a data cube implemented by their government.
So achieving interoperability in a way, I was having this conversation yesterday with Sarela. I think is just not getting stuck on semantics, on where the data come from, who produced it, how, what's the method, because there's always going to be some comment about it or some suggestion about it. But since this type of data is recently getting to the hands of the users, I think that those are valid questions, but just in time will be as mature, I guess, I hope, I dream, will be just as mature as perhaps the statistical community, where you have, okay, the university of this area published this data and nobody is wondering what's the process of the production of this data. They just take it, they have it in different formats, they don't mind because they have the tools that can convert them to the tools that they need to. So in a way, it's just having something that when you talk about it, everyone understands it. So semantics aside, it's just interoperability.
Any comments?
Sorry, Brian, was that to me? No, I don't think I have anything else. I think Jimena and Lisa covered it well.
Just to mention that I think is the same across all these three is this open science theme. It's something that NASA is quite passionate about, and I think CEOS is as well. And you notice it's a lot of sharing of data, sharing of applications and methods. And I think the more we do of that, the better. There is no doubt that what's happening in some of these test cases in the Americas is going to use things from Digital Earth Pacific and Africa. And that's exciting because you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time and come up with new things. You know, people have already figured out some of these hard problems. So that's really exciting. So the last question I have to end on would be, how can the GEO community better support these initiatives? I think it was Aditya had actually in these charts a few bullets. One was helping with funding, because none of these things are free. And I think the other one was related to just maybe having more of these kind of meetings and collaboration. So anything else come to mind about how GEO can help? I know Yana cried this morning and said we all need to speak up during plenary time if there's something they can do. Anybody else? Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, maybe just to emphasize that, yeah, I think the potential is really to promote these platforms within the GEO community, but also beyond the GEO community, so that more people can leverage the resources, the tools, the technology that we're making available, because that's really what helps us achieve that economy of scale. So yes, I would just say using the voice of GEO to project it loudly and widely, but also across sectors. Yes, and you know, we have focus already in food security in the water, but beyond that, the potential for these tools is huge. Right. So just how do we promote it more widely?
There's another thing this morning I had a conversation with Baco on North Africa, and he was telling me about the in situ data that they're collecting, thousands of samples, which will go into the North Africa platform. And I asked him the question, can I see those samples? And it was an easy yes. And I think that's exciting. So the whole idea of in situ data, as we know, is this, this thing over here on the side that we haven't tackled in GEO, right? We've talked about satellite data, and that's becoming pretty easy. I think in situ data is the challenging one. And if we can find better ways to organize that and to share it, and Digital Earth Africa, you could kind of be a poster child for that, where you've got all that data there and share it with the community and put it in a place where it's easily accessible. That's exciting, because right now it's kind of spread throughout the world in a lot of places. So I see that as kind of a component of these Digital Earth programs, where the communities capture in situ data and to help with validation of all sorts. That's really powerful. So I like that as well. So we're near the end. Is another one? Please. My pleasure. Yeah.
Ruud Gimmel of the Netherlands Space Office. I was really, the idea of collecting and sharing in situ data, of course, is a great idea. But in practice, you run into many problems, practicalities. To give you one example, there is, I think, a project funded by the European Commission. It's, I think, also supporting the GeoGlam project, and they are collecting in situ data, but let's say it's up to the government to decide what is happening with the in situ data. And what I a little bit understand is that the in situ data is not given for free. So if you speak about, okay, what can GEO maybe do? I don't know exactly if they can be helpful in this respect, but let's say this kind of bottlenecks have to be solved as well. So that also the, let's say the local governments are supportive to this idea, and also allowing that this kind of data is made available for free.
It's definitely an issue. It's hard to get the data. Yeah, and a lot of countries won't release it. Any other questions? We're at the end here, and comment, please.
And just kind of thinking how GEO could help. And one idea is, we have these different data cubes or different programs, and I could see something really cool coming, maybe in a couple years, but we're maybe sooner than that, where we could all work together on a specific project. Maybe it's something like coastlines where there could be some sharing, because I think sometimes the idea, we want to collaborate, we want to do things, but from my experience, it's only in the doing that the collaborating really happens. So maybe having some test case could be a nice way to show the power of this idea of these different digital earths.
Yeah, one example I can think of is the collection of in situ data. So I've been involved in a few cases where people are going out and collecting it, and a lot of times the collectors don't really know what to do. Like what kind of information should they be gathering as they're collecting data? Well, having some consistency around the world or within our programs would really be interesting, right? Because if you collected the data the same way, now we can all use it similarly. All right, so any other questions? I think I'll end there and say thanks again to all the speakers. Thanks to all of you that attended. I hope you enjoyed the air conditioning as much as I did. And we will all be around the rest of the week. So if you have any other questions about these programs, please see the people here. And if you need something from Aditya, we'll make sure he gets the question. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to the technical team for making this all work. You had a rough start, but you finished strong. That's good. Got it. Worked out well. Thanks for inviting.
and we can make policy changes to make sure we can preserve. We're talking about agriculture, we're talking about forestry, all of these things.
In the Pacific region, we have the least capacity to access and apply satellite data. So it's critical that we build the fundamental digital
to help us not only understand the science, but to better manage our natural resources.
The innovative thing with Digital Earth Pacific, is it automates a lot of this processing, which previously we have to manually do. It automatically generates this analysis-ready product.